So this is your first flower show.
It is my first flower show, so I was confessing to Francis at the back there that I'm one of those people who would love to be a gardener, but I don't know what I do, but I literally look at a plant, everything all wilted in here by the time we finish. I look at a plant and it just dies.
Really?
Yes.
But you have, is it 4 acres of land that you have?
Yes, but grass is fine.
Do you know no May?
I do no May. And actually, we've done a little experiment at home over the last 2 years, which has been, and it's absolutely wonderful thing to do. And I'm aware that it's very lucky to have a couple of acres to muck around with like this. But actually, having seen some of the gardens here today, you realise that you can do this pretty much on any size of space. But we've got a 2-acre field which is very steep. It's north facing. It's very rocky, and it's basically a small model. So we were raising sheep on it, but we'd have to take sheep off for quite a lot of the year because the grass would just go, and it would take quite a long time to come back. So I was thinking there's got to be a better way of using this piece of land, and there's also something about you learn very quickly, when we move to the small holding, you learn very quickly that you don't actually own land ever. You might think you do, but you don't. You're just, you're the guardian of it. And you I became particularly acutely conscious of what happens if I mess this land up? What happens if I do something terrible to it? And you do start to think about legacy. You do start to think about the impact that you could have, good or bad, on a piece of land. And thanks to fantastic organisations like the Woodland Trust and WWT, the Wildflower and Wetlands Trust, I thought, well, maybe I could make this piece of land something that I'm never going to see it in its full glory in my lifetime, but it sort of doesn't matter. So we planted trees. It's quite the most ridiculous thing, and if I didn't know Jim, it wouldn't have been able to happen. But this is a really, really, really steep slope, and I was like, should we put a pond in there? Like, quite a big pond. Like, I don't know, 40 by 20 metre.
That is a big pond.
And Jim, who I think is 82, wears a plaid shirt, whatever the weather, opens his navel, and is completely uncomfortable. And he went, I can do that. No problem, I'll just bring a digger in. And he dug this amazing kind of lake. And so we started from scratch with the Woodland Trust, because we've got forestry all around our land. And I hated that kind of very hard boundary between kind of pasture and then line and then trees. And we're lucky that it's broadleaf trees as well, so it's really beautiful. And so I thought, well, I just want to try and, merge our land in, make it feel like a whole rather than a separate parcel.
It's very interesting this thing about Phil. And of course, literally said exactly the same thing just before about having his garden with a boundary of trees where the neighbours were, and then planting trees in the garden. So even on a tiny scale, that merging works.
Absolutely. And seeing some of the gardens here, just that incredibly inventive way. I mean, there are gardens here much more beautiful than my field, it has to be said. But nonetheless, all those elements, the elements of having trees, of letting, so we're now letting kind of nature take hold. And what's fantastic this year that didn't happen last year is the bluebells that were in the wood were starting to spread up the slope. They're now everywhere. And there are wildflowers all over that we hadn't had before. And the trees, despite the deer as best effort, not a deer, but not each everything. So we found a thing which is apparently sheep fat. Here you are. This is my top gardening tip for you. But apparently deer don't like the smell of sheep fat, and there is a perfectly inert, not insect damaging sheep fat based spray that you can put on your trees and your roses, or around your trees and your roses.
And has it worked?
Well, we've got trees coming out of plants now, so and they're not just being lived off. So it's early days, but
That's amazing.
Seems to be. So yeah, so the trees are starting to come. We've got tadpoles in the lake. You know, the pond plants that you really don't want to know this. I planted the pond. I had to get in the pond because I'd forgotten about the shelf thing, which is quite useful, isn't it? Yeah. See, I told you I was a rubbish gardener. So I had to just get in the pond and plant it.
Quite nice to do that.
It's
on a
quite
hot
nice.
day.
Yeah, it's quite warm. Yeah. It wasn't very elegant. But yeah, so they're all starting to take shape now. And it's just the most wonderful. I mean, I don't know, I'm preaching to converted here because you're all gardeners and you know that wonderful thing of starting from scratch and seeing, you know, it's like you're kind of tickling nature to do her best and kind of helping her out and saying, just chuck in a bit of this. But then letting nature do its thing, you know, create, just allow it. Growing is a miracle.
It is a miracle. And I think also when you have the luxury of a bit of size of space, then you can do that sort of more rewilding thing, which doesn't really work in a garden because you can watch that process.
Say that. I mean, you know, there's like the garden that's got little wildflower meadow outside it, and just the beautiful planting around a lovely eating area. And I mean, my garden will never ever look like that, but it does go to show, and it's really, for me, it's incredibly heartening walking around the show gardens here to see that actually, you know, nature has kind of become the muse for so many garden designers, and you're not seeing kind of tight topiary and, you know, lots of gravel everywhere. You're seeing, you know, people want flowers. They want to be able to see bees and butterflies and hear water trickling. And it's for me as a naturalist, this has been an absolute joy today.
Oh.
It makes you think, yes.
It's so lovely to hear you say that. And my only thing is I hope it's not a trend. Because we always talk, you know, with Chelsea flowers, they would always talk about, you know, trends in horticulture. Well, I don't think that thinking about the planet and the wildlife should be a trend. I just really hope that's a long-term shift in all of our approaches.
Yeah.
But what must be lovely is, as a naturalist, you can actually identify things that come to the garden that we always talk about. It will bring insects in that very vague way, that, you know, to be able to watch and target particular species that are needed.
In a way, yes, but you know, it's like people this group that I've just taken up to Shetland, you know, it's not an exclusively wildlife tour. It's kind of, you know, it's basically meet my mates in Shetland who do all sorts of things. So there are farmers and there are wildlife people. But of course Shetland is a wonderful place for wildlife. And you can see that some people get worried because they don't know what a garret looks like, or, you know, they'll know a puffin, but we'll show them a kind of black guillemot, which is a really smart little bird, isn't it? But, you know, you can see that people are worried about, I'm not an expert, I don't know. It doesn't matter. For me, it's about noticing and enjoying. If you don't know what it's called, I mean, frankly, at our age, not your age, obviously, you're very young, but, you know, I can't remember what my husband's called most of the time. So, you know, the name doesn't matter. To me, it's about noticing and appreciating and enjoying. And that might then spark you to get a fulfilled gut or whatever it might be. But, you know, if you notice that something that you planted this year for the first time, encourage, you know, suddenly you hear your garden is noisy with buzzing, or you see something flittering about that you haven't seen in your garden before, I've done something right. You know, I've done a great thing here. So that's more important than worrying about, well, have I got a particular hoverfly, or have I been able to, you know, get mason bees or something like that.
But you said you've been working with the Woodland Trust to get your trees. So do you also do that and recommend other people to speak to experts in the local area and see if there are specific species you can plant that would bring?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, we've all done it. I know I've done it. That we, you know, we see something beautiful in a magazine, or we see something beautiful at a show, and we think, oh, I'll just go and plant that, and then it dies, and you've wasted money, and also you just feel a bit rubbish. And you know, we are very, very lucky in this country that there are, you know, some fantastic organisations that really do want to. I mean, that's what they're there for. And you know, organisations like the Woodland Trust, like WWT, if people want to, create ponds and things, there are great resources out there to help people. And I mean, I know there's an amazing local sort of bee association that is associated with the showground here. And near me, in Monmouth, is Bees for Development. And again, they're a fantastic charity that will say to people, of course they can help people say what do we plant in our garden if we want to help pollinators. That's what they do. So yeah, there are some great, never be shy about going and saying, I don't know what to do, but I want to do the right thing.
I mean, I have a lawn in my garden that's about the size of this table, and I'm contacting say, butterflies just to find out what I can put in that tiny patch of lawn for butterflies in my area. I'm just out of garden. It doesn't matter how big or small, it's still
it's perfect. And if we start to think, we did years and years and years ago, we tried to do a thing on Spring Watch where we were talking about hedgehogs. And there is something absolutely joyful if you see a hedgehog in your garden, not least because you think, just eat all the slugs. But of course, if you've got a garden that is fenced all the way around, how do those hedgehogs move around? And so we had a little campaign to try and ask people to put little hedgehog holes in their fences so that they could move through. And then you start to think, well, hang on a second, we've got all these individual gardens, but together they're the most fantastic resource for nature. And actually, if we all think about that, if we think about our garden as being, I love to think of it as like a patchwork quilt or something like that every garden has a value within it, and as a whole, they are fantastic habitat for wildlife.
Agreed. And on the theme of hedgehogs, as we are in Noma May, I just want to also do my own little campaign that when you do mow your lawn, just beat through it and make a lot of noise before you do, because there might be things like hedgehogs and newts and lizards all hanging out in what I think is a very safe place to be the whole year, rather than just the lawn. But I want to talk about your book, because I'm reading it. I think it's a really wonderful book, and it's all an exploration of home, isn't it?
Yeah, so it was, I mean, if I'm absolutely honest, this was a very, it was a very personal project. I don't mean that in that, it's a sort of personal expose of my life, which really isn't interesting. But it was, I was really intrigued by what it is that makes a home. And the reason for that is that, where I live now, I moved to Wales in 16 and a half years ago, to the house that we're in now. I have no connection with Wales. I haven't even really been there on holiday. I mean, I've been a couple of times. So I have no emotional connection there, no relations there, no heritage there. And yet, for reasons that I still don't understand, I was desperate to live there. Desperate. And basically, the only reason, when I said to my husband, I think we should just go live in Wales, and he was like, you don't live in Wales, they go there on holiday. And I said, well, some people do live in Wales, and maybe we could. And he said, but it's, it's 10 hours from anywhere, which is so not true. But anyway, when you live in London, that's sort of what you think. And then he got offered a job in Cardiff, only for a year. And I was like, take it! And he said, well, it's only for a year, so we'll rent out our house in London, and we'll rent that down there. And I was thinking, yeah, get me over that bridge, I ain't never going there. And that was 16 and a half years ago, so guess who won that off? But it was really curious, because when we started to look for somewhere to live, and we did initially look for somewhere to rent, every time we drove over the Severn Bridge, my heart lifted. It sort of did this little skip. And I just thought, why do I feel like I'm coming home? I have never been homesick. I've always been incredibly kind of peripatetic. I left home when I was 18, and then and basically kind of went everywhere, and didn't live anywhere for for long periods of time. So I've never had that, and I've never felt like I needed a route, and yet somehow this called me. what was that? So I was intrigued by that, but I was also intrigued by the fact that, and this happens, I think, when you get to my age, and you know, I lost my dad in 2019, my mum's on her own, and suddenly you have that very sharp focal point that hits you between the eyes, which is, where am I going to live when I'm old? How, you know, like I had to have the conversation with my mum of what happens now. You know, you've been married for over 50 years and suddenly you're on your own. Where do you go? What do you do? What are the important elements? What's home? And I have this ridiculous dream, given that I can't even put a shelf up, that I want to build my own house.
I don't think that's ridiculous.
Good. My husband's going, really? Maybe we'll just stick to a tent. But I would love to build my own house. But then you think, well, where would that house be? And what are the elements? What is it? You know, you can build something perfect. I'm sure we've all done it. We've all been into somebody else's home and thought, it doesn't feel right. You know, what is it? So basically, this book was trying to find out, for my own sake, what it is that constitutes home.
You also visit lots of other people with lots of different setups.
Yeah.
So there's communal living, there's people who live on the road, all sorts of things. Is that also part of the exploration with your mum in mind as well? Is that part of that? It was support, really.
It was really just, you know, I mean, I am a very nosy person. And you know, it's why I started working in television. I never wanted to be on television. I love the research, I love the kind of stories and the, you know, finding out about things, and it was just a perfect excuse to do that. And this book, I thought, well, you know, the only way I'm going to even get close to an answer is to talk to lots of different people who live in different circumstances, and see if, you know, I can build up a sort of picture of what home is. So as you say, you know, I talked to people who, I talked to a couple who decided that they were going to live on a boat and sail around the world, but live on their boat. And are still living on that boat now 15 years later, even though they ran out of money and they didn't know how to sail. And I talked to, you know, I talked to somebody, a couple, an extraordinary, wonderful couple, who had lived in, or not a couple, a brother and sister, who lived in a croft in Shetland, actually, all their lives. And then it was struck by lightning and burned to the ground, and they lost everything. You know, they're both in their 80s, and they lost all their family history. So how do you start again? Can you build a home again off the back of that? What were the things that they missed? You know, what are the things that they felt they lost by losing everything? And actually, the answer was really surprising in some ways, and really not surprising in others. They're called Ruby and Lily, and Ruby said to me, if my parents had still been alive, all they would care about is whether we had survived. And by a miracle they did, mainly because she had a hip replacement, which made she climb out of the window. She said, if I hadn't had the hip done, I'd never have got out. But, you know, I talked to an amazing man called Damien Labasse, who's a writer, but he's a gypsy, he's from a gypsy family. And, you know, our perception, if, you know, if you're not from a gypsy family, our perception is that gypsies are always on the move and you know, don't have a fixed point that's home. Totally wrong, that turns out. You know, they're probably much more rooted than most of us. I talked to somebody, you know, the average, and you might want to have a guess actually, but the average number of homes that people live in over their lifetime in the UK, any thoughts? Yeah, 14. 14. So quite unusual to find somebody who's lived in the same house that they were born in. And interestingly, this was another Shetlander actually. They don't own that house, but he's the fourth generation of his family. So they're crofters, they were moved off to, it's called Muckle Row, an island on the west side of the main Shetland island. They moved there in the clearances. and been there ever since. And the house or the croft is like it's like a kind of, it's almost like the building equivalent of a photo album. So literally every building has got, you know, he said, well, my granddad built that barn, and then my dad built that, and we put the thing. So, you know, it's basically morphed as the family has changed or got bigger, or and he was just wonderful about this idea of home, and he's so rooted there. And I said, you know, do you go on holiday? You know, he's a crofter and he's a fencer, and you know, he's working on the land, and most people in Shetland and living that way don't go on holiday. They've got too many things to do, basically. I said, have you ever been on holiday? He said, not really. He said, I've left Shetland, I think, twice. He said, and it's so unlike you. And this is a man in his 70s, and I'm sitting in his kitchen with his lovely wife, Jetta, and his daughter. And I did not expect him to say this. He said, I did go to Glasgow to see Johnny Parton. He said, we were so far back, I might as well have watched her on the telly. And he said, and to be honest, I couldn't wait to get home. And he said, my favourite part of the whole experience of going to see Johnny Parton was coming back over the top, by which he means when you get to his, just before you get to his croft, you're going down a single track lane, and there's a little rise, and then you go over the top, and he's just down there, and he said, that's it, that's all I want to see, that's what I was waiting for, to go back over the top.
Amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
You also look, obviously, to wildlife and the animal kingdom, and what home means to different species as well defines your answers, I suppose.
Well, you know, we are a very strange species generally, because we, perhaps this particular audience less so, because you're here because you love gardens and you love nature and being outdoors. But generally, we think of ourselves weirdly as a separate species, that we're not part of the overall ecosystem, but we're just another mammal. Sorry to, you know, do you down, but you are. We are. And so I thought, you know, it would be really interesting to look at the parallels between, you know, the natural world and our world, to see whether there were, as I say, things that I could learn from that. And actually, what I discovered was that there were so many parallels with each story. And essentially, you know, every living thing desires and needs the same thing. They need somewhere safe. Safety was a word that came up a lot. You know, what is home? It's somewhere that I feel safe. They need safety, security, you know, protection from the elements. And then there will be other things that are intensely personal to each, you know, to each person that I talk to. But one of the stories that just, I mean, it amused me. But when I met this couple, Barry and Wayne, who decided that they were going to go live on the boat, I mentioned them earlier. And as they weren't sailors, but they decided that they were going to go and sail around the world. And they're very, very, very different, complete opposites. Barry, very quiet, very kind of restrained, quite shy and introverted. Wayne, the absolute opposite, you know, complete extrovert, loves everybody, loves being in company with, you know, everybody, tattooed, pierced, you know. So how these two came together and then were able to live on a tiny boat, and you know, they haven't got lots of money, so don't think, you know, some glossy gin palace. This was like an 18-metre fiberglass sailing boat, and they literally did a 3-month sailing course and then set off to sail around the world, which they did remarkably over 3 years. And as I say, they are still living on that boat. And when I was talking to them, because Wayne is, to his, you know, he said, I'm a complete trainer. I have, you know, 200 pairs of trainers, I have 100 watches, whereas Barry hasn't got anything at all. He said it's easy for me to get to downsize life onto a boat. He said I just sort of packed a couple of pairs of pants and that's it, you know, whereas Wayne's going, oh my goodness, you know, I can't possibly get rid of, you know, all these things. And they just keep, but they're so, the way that they live and the way that they are with each other brought to mind two species called a goby and a pistol shrimp. And I don't know whether anyone is a diver or a snorkeler in the tent, but if you are in warm seas and you're snorkeling or diving over a sandy bit of seabed, you might get, from the corner of your eye, you might see sand being frantically kind of kicked up. Not in a big way, just a sort of little eruption going on in the sand. And if you stay very, 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 very still and wait, you will then see a little creature emerging from this eruption. And it's a shrimp. And this is a pistol shrimp. And then it will sit outside the hole that it has dug, its little burrow. And then you'll look again and you'll go, hold on a minute, is that a fish that's also sitting there? And that's a little fish called a goby. Now these two animals, you would think they've got nothing in common, you know, why are they together? But a pistol shrimp can't see, and a goby can't dig. So they have a perfect partnership where the pistol shrimp will dig a burrow and it will sit outside it, and it's got long antennae, and it will rest its antenna on the fish. And if the fish sees something that, you know, it identifies, it's going to think, tasty, there's a shrimp over there, the fish will send out a kind of chemical reaction that the shrimp will pick up, and then the shrimp will go into its burrow and the fish will go in with it, and they live together because they have this perfect partnership. And that made me think of Barry and Rain.
Lovely. That's so lovely. Do you know, ironically, the thing that I related to most in your book as a gardener was the snail.
Yes.
I've lived for many years in a van, and I've always described myself as a snail. And the reason I like the van is I'm a snail, everything on my back. But in your book, you made me rethink it because you say actually snails, they may have things on their back, but they also have a home, and they will come back to their home, which is your garden.
Yes.
And that's lovely because there is that. You may live in your van, but you also have the places that are home. And I think that's really lovely.
And it is, I mean, it's really interesting. You said, had we met before, I would obviously, you would be in this book. Because to me, that's very interesting, the idea, I mean, it was a little bit like talking to Damien, the gypsy, who doesn't live in a van, lives in his great-grandmother's house, and there's a huge conflict around that, which is, I mean, it was a fascinating insight into, you know, the way that society works. But one thing, I mean, everyone's idea of home is very different. That was something I took away from this. I also took away the fact that we think that having a home is just a right. You know, we all deserve to have a home, but my goodness, it's hard won. And lots of people don't have homes, or find it very hard to find a home, or lose their homes in circumstances that are absolutely not their fault. So there's the an extraordinarily moving story that was told to me by Rana, who is a Syrian refugee. And her idea of home now, she was living in Aleppo, that was all she knew. Her whole family, her whole life, her whole community, everything was there. She was married, 2 children at the time of the war starting. And I mean, I won't tell you her whole story now, but I didn't understand until I spoke to her why people in that situation had to flee across borders. But of course, many of us take it for granted that you have a passport, but lots of people don't have a passport. She didn't need a passport. I'm from Aleppo, this is where I live, this is my home, this is everything. Why would I go anywhere else? And she and her husband had to run across the Turkish border with 2 small children, one of whom is profoundly disabled, having seen 2 kids get shot by border guards an hour before. And it's unimaginable. And for somebody to try and get their life back together, having lost everything, and it's not just physical things, you know, it is, and this is something again that came out, you know, home is, it is lovely to have a lovely sofa. This is a very nice sofa. It's lovely to have a lovely sofa, it's lovely to have your things around you, but for a lot of people, home is about community. It's about the people that are there. It's about, you know, knowing that someone might wave at you on the street or something like that. Something that gives you a sense of being anchored. And landscape as well. And landscape, absolutely landscape. What's familiar? You know, when do you look out and you have memories attached to that. So she lost absolutely everything, and her language, and her culture, everything. And she found home in Newport, in South Wales, because of the kindness of the people in that community. And she said, I can't go back to Aleppo, I've lost everything, my home isn't there anymore, my home is here because of people's kindness. And it was just an extraordinary insight into, you know, as I say, the complexity of what it is that makes us feel belong, what it is that makes us feel safe, and what it is that makes us feel at home.
And take some questions from people in the audience. Does anyone have a question? Yes. Do you want to, you can shout it if you like, and then I can repeat it.
You mentioned hedgehogs. We come up with an idea of a load of terraced houses, renting a core drill and making the holes for all the walls. Is it a good idea? So the gardens join up?
Absolutely, it's a brilliant idea. I mean, I'm not going to say that it was an idea that we had when we were doing Springwatch 20 years ago. No, brilliant, absolutely brilliant idea. I mean, the more we can join gardens up, the more that we can persuade, you know, somebody at number 62 who's decided to put AstroTurf down rather than, you know, the better. So, brilliant idea. Do it and try, you know, just monitor it if you can. Just kind of keep a little record of it, because it's the sort of thing that even if it never, you know, it's not about kind of getting it on the telly or anything else, but it is about inspiring other communities and other people to do the same thing. So please do it, and please tell me how it goes.
Any other questions? Jackie is here, by the way, with the microphone. The lady at the front here, do you have a question? Is it? No, I missed all. I thought I said.
Gentleman there.
Okay, you say you've got you know, a fair bit of land where you live now in Wales. Do you ever get carried away by buying too many plants or things like that to overplant it, or do you think you've got that land, you've got to fill it with plants now, or
Yes.
what's your sort of
Yes, is the short answer. I mean, you know, and also I have ideas well above my, it's not even above my station, just above my level of expertise, which is, you know, nothing. So yes, I will get sort of carried away with, the main thing I do actually is not so much plants, it's seeds. I love growing vegetables, and I used to have, when we lived in London, we had an allotment. And it was amazing. And we grew, I mean, I thought I was, basically, to move over Alan Titchmarsh, I'm brilliant at this, and grew, you know, so many fantastic vegetables in this allotment, and, you know, so much so that whenever we got invited to friends' houses, instead of taking a bottle of wine to say thank you for dinner, we'd, you know, take an armful of vegetables, and everyone got so fed up, please don't bring us any more butternut squash, you know. And so I thought, as I said, that I was the most brilliant gardener. Now I live, and it's not that high, but I live, our house is on a hill, and we're about 275 metres. I mean, you say that to somebody in Peru, and they think it's a bloody joke, and say, we grow potatoes at 5,000 metres, what's the matter with you? But it's much harder. You know, you've got to move away from that sort of lovely, warm ecosystem and the evening riding schools horse muck, that clearly did the trick. and it's much harder. So every year I go, right, I'm going to get, and I get carried away with the seeds, wonderful seeds. Oh goodness, that looks amazing. And I love vegetables. I love the look of them. I think, my dream garden in a way is a vegetable garden. There's nothing more beautiful than a vegetable garden. So yes, I come, and I've got packets and packets and packets of seeds. And then just think, right, what am I, even if these germinate, where the hell am I going to put them all and how are they going to work? So yes, that's my sort of, my guilty pleasure, is buying lots of seeds.
But you also have some success as well.
A little bit of success, and I also have a very good friend, another Kate, and she's a properly good gardener, so she's on my speed dial for how do I do this, or what have I done there, or should I plant this, or yeah. So as we were saying right at the beginning of this, no shame in asking for help. I always ask for help.
Agreed. I think we have time for one more question. This lady at the back. How can we make our decaying urban centres, like towns,
Yes.
nicer?
Yes. Well, it's a very good question, and it is something that people like Hugh Bradley-Whittingstall was trying to champion quite a long time ago by having, kind of basically communal plantings in town centres. And I've seen, I'm sure you have as well, I've seen initiatives in places like Amsterdam, where it's guerrilla gardening, where people will go and kind of, spread seeds in places where there is just sort of bare earth, or go and clear out a patch. I've seen it in Havana, I've seen it, there are great initiatives out there. I fear that if it's something that we wait for councils to get around to do, it's never going to happen. So I think it is a community thing. I think it's something that, people need to get together and say, right, we're going to do this. We're going to take this initiative. We're going to, use spaces or build raised beds or something. There's, does anyone know Hexham in Northumberland? Because they've got lovely, I don't know whether they still have, but certainly when I was last there, they had kind of raised beds in the town with little signs saying help yourself, and they just had things like rosemary bushes and stuff, so you could go and gather go and forage your herbs. So I think there are lots of things that can be done, and should be done. The great problem that I've had, and I suspect you've come across this as well, is that people start with great enthusiasm, but it's keeping something going, and it's hard work, and when it's raining, and when it's miserable. We tried to start a community-supported agriculture scheme on our farm 12 years ago, and that's basically, it's like a sort of big allotment scheme where everyone shares in the work and everyone shares in the produce. And it's a lovely idea, and lots of people think it's fantastic. But then when it comes to, well, who's going to water on a nice warm August day when they'd quite like to be, out in their own gardens? It's a tricky thing, but there are lots of ways of doing it. But it does come down to, ultimately, I think it comes down to the will of a community or a group to do it. But I think it could be done, and it would be a lovely thing to do.
I agree with that. And I think actually one thing I would say is making it nice doesn't look the same for everybody. So lots of guerrilla projects, and Bristol's a great city for those sorts of things. Edinburgh, Bristol, doing veg for communities to come and help themselves to. It doesn't look nice, it looks messy, but also it's doing a fantastic thing for the ecosystem and for the communities. And in all my years of working in community gardens and working with community gardens, it takes a person, one dedicated person in a school, in a hospital, in any setting, to set these things up and keep them going. So I would suggest we have lots of enthusiastic gardeners here, and you all live somewhere. Maybe you could all be that one person who takes on space in your towns and make it productive, beautiful, eco-friendly, whatever it is you want to create. And
I mean, the other thing is that Bees for Development, the charity that I mentioned earlier, and I suspect, again, there are other initiatives like that, but they started an initiative called Bee Friendly Monmouthshire, and planted up roundabouts and verges with wildflowers. And, you know, to say, it doesn't take much. If you've got wildflowers everywhere, it looks absolutely beautiful. And it's very low maintenance and not an expensive thing to do. But, you know, it's great for wildlife, and I'm including us in that, because we are wildlife, and, you know, we may not feed off them, but they're beautiful to look at, and it's great then, obviously, for pollinators. So those are other things that could be done that just make an area look beautiful, and have a really good purpose behind them as well.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Kate. Now you're doing a book signing.
I am.
Where the Hearth is just
Over
there
there.
right now. So if you want to get this book, then it's going to be there to buy it, and we'll sign and things like that.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much for Kate. Thank you very much. If you have a question, question time, so go and buy your book and then come back and get your seats. So we'll see you very shortly with Adam Doss, John Wheatley and Ellen Mary. Thank you.